Does the UFC regret not making George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva? Does the UFC regret not making Anderson Silva versus Jon Jones? I would love to know that. I mean, I would just be curious. If you could get a real, right, if you could get the correct answer, I would be curious about that. Because those are two dream matches that we were all curious about and we all wanted to see, even in the moment. And as time has gone by, they've aged even better. Like, we really would like to know what would have happened with world champion Anderson Silva versus 25-year-old Jon Jones. That's very curious. And the reason I ask that is there's been a very, very strict discipline at the UFC to have divisions and the guys stay within their divisions. And what did Daniel Cormier come out with a stat? It was like 0.003% of athletes ever in history have been double champion. And Dominic Cruz quickly pushed back on that and said, while that might be the math, it doesn't represent that 0.003 athletes are all that could have been double champion. It was getting the opportunity was so wildly difficult. Now, do you want to know why I bring that up? It's not going away. Ilia versus Islam. And it also wasn't the right time when it first came out. Before we were armed with the information that Islam was going to be stripped and go up to 170 to challenge for that belt, before we were armed with that, we had Islam and Ilia in the same bracket, in the same weight class. And we had Ilia making it very well known, I'm coming for you. And we, the audience, assumed he'd get the match. It was a very interesting debate of, do we go with the number one guy, which was Charles? Do we go with that? Or does number one not surpass world champion? But it's from a different weight class. Like, it was an interesting debate. I mean, Charles planted his feet and said, I appreciate how good you are, but you haven't done anything here. I've beaten all these guys and I've climbed the road here. I'm the guy. And frankly, Islam, through Khabib, agreed with Charles that, hey, Ilia, wonderful job on a wonderful career at 145. It doesn't translate here. And this is what we had to live with. And I was coming out and I was telling you guys, Islam versus Ilia is not the big piece of business that they think it is and that they want it to be. They being Ilia and Islam. Thinking like champion versus champion, and this is going to be the biggest fight ever. That's not true. That is them not having their thumb on the pulse. Them being influenced by themselves and their peer group and their social media followers. It would have been a big fight. It's a main event. It would have done just fine. But like, year in review for 2025, had this fight gone down at International Fight Weekend a couple of weeks ago, year in review of 2025, it does not set a record for Livegate, for advancement of show sellout, for distribution, for pay-per-view. However, bringing Ilia, and this was Khabib's suggestion, and I will tell you, purely from a business standpoint, Khabib could not have been more correct. Bring Ilia to 155 and have him do anything. Absolutely anything. Against anybody. The number 6 guy, the number 8 guy, the number 3 guy. Pick a guy at random, do it at 155. Have Ilia do something against anybody successfully, and then drawing him into Islam. You're having a wildly different conversation, and you're having a wildly different night of business. So that's where we are now. And this talk just won't go away. Dean Thomas weighed in on this as early as this morning. Dean Thomas actually picked Ilia. Dean Thomas said even prior to seeing Topuria versus Oliveira, that he was picking Ilia in a mythical matchup against Islam. And Topuria's come out, he did an interview, and he said that the UFC, when he was given the opportunity to fight for a world championship at 155 pounds, the UFC made him promise that he would not go to welterweight. Like this theme of leaving a belt and moving up to the next division and seeing how you do and sliding right into main events. Like let's not make a habit out of this. We respect what you've done. We hear your request to stop having to battle that damn scale. We will give you an opportunity up here, but let's make sure that this stays here and doesn't become a habit. Okay. Interesting, though, that the UFC was sincere enough about the idea of having divisions that they actually had the conversation. Interesting, because Islam has never come off the idea that I'm going to fight at 70 and 55. If you were to interview Islam right now, he will tell you, I'm going to fight at 70, and then I'm going to come back to 55. Now, the UFC doesn't agree. And they don't agree, and that was signified by the fact that they pulled the belt off him. Islam did not lose that belt, and Islam did not vacate that belt. Islam got stripped of that belt. In return, he's given an opportunity for a different belt. And I'm just curious. I'm just curious if the UFC looks back and thinks we should have made George and Anderson. Because it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel like when the UFC, and I'm going back in time, but when the UFC was denying publicly, denying the idea of St. Pierre versus Anderson, or when the UFC was denying publicly the idea of Anderson versus Jones, at that time, it did not feel as though that was a backdoor way of marketing to build up those fights. It felt like they were really being quite frank in letting us know that's not going to happen. And now Ilia comes out and says that he had to agree not to go to 170. The concept of Islam returning to 155 is a real stretch for me. Whether Islam is saying it and Islam means it or not, I don't believe if Islam has success at 170, right? The biggest challenge that Islam's ever had, and clearly the most unpleasant experience that Islam has had in the sport, is just beating the scale at 155. I think that Islam is going to be a lot like Ilia, which is, hey, this is great. Thank goodness I got here. And the caveat there is if he has success at 170. I'm very confident in telling you guys, if Islam has success at 170 and becomes the champion, that whatever dreams you have of Islam versus Ilia haven't gotten closer, they got further apart. In fact, I would tell you, if you have a dream of seeing Islam versus Ilia, it's very unlikely. But the best way to get there would be if Islam was to lose at 170.